The ward speakers clipped the final syllable from a patient's cry. Dr. Cora Wynne stopped in the moving corridor, forced her way through the inbound shift, and ran toward the voice everyone else had already dismissed. The translator had rendered it as a routine complaint, pressure, mild, waiting acceptable. The sound beneath the translation said none of those things. It came again from a recessed treatment bay, thin at first, then doubled by a lower breath tone that the speakers flattened into static. A Nhalu patient lay upright on the examination cradle, narrow shoulders rigid, four-fingered hands pressed beneath the ribs. The diagnostic panel showed stable respiration. Beside the patient's collarbone, a thumb-sized lumi clung to the fabric and flashed white in violent, uneven bursts. "Cancel the sedative," Cora said. The attending orderly stared at her. The patient requested calm. "No," the translator requested calm. She crossed the bay, placed a resonance patch against the patient's chest, and listened through the unprocessed pickup. Wet friction rasped beneath the upper lungs. The lower harmonic came again, carrying a change in pitch that made the lumi flare almost blue. Internal bleeding. Cora cut the automated medication feed, opened the emergency seal beneath the cradle, and called for a pressure drain. The orderly moved only when the patient folded forward and dark fluid spotted the breathing membrane. By the time the respiratory team arrived, Cora had the patient stabilized, and the translator had revised its statement to acute distress identified. It sounded confident enough to make her angry. The shift review gallery was already sealed when she reached it. Through the transparent partition, medical staff stood in precise rows, while Director Jex Arden addressed them from the central dais. Shift Marshal Tavik Ral waited beside the door, broad enough to block it without effort. "You are late," he said. A patient was bleeding into the respiratory sac. "You were assigned to review." "I was assigned to medicine." The Biscari's jaw plates tightened. Behind him, Arden paused, every face in the gallery turned toward Cora. "Take the disciplinary mark," Tavik said. Cora stepped past him toward the display. "Pull the Nhalu intake record from the East Ward." His hand closed around her wrist. Cora looked down at it, then up at him. "Release me." "You will stand where ordered." He pulled. Cora turned with the force instead of against it. Her free hand caught his forearm, her shoulder passed beneath the line of his elbow, and his attempt to drag her backward drove his weight against the low edge of the dais. She trapped the arm, guided the rotation, and lowered rather than hurled him. 10 seconds after Tavik Ral closed his hand around Cora's wrist, he was staring up at the briefing lights from the floor. No one laughed. Cora released him at once and stepped back. "You arrived late," he said, breath rough with shock. The emergency was already there. She crossed to the central display, pulled up the patient file, and enlarged the first translated complaint beside the later diagnosis. Arden's expression barely changed. "Marshal, are you injured?" Tavik flexed his hand. Nothing was broken. Pride was another matter. "No." "Then stand." He did slowly. Cora pointed to the two statements. Same patient, same minute. The first translation told staff the patient could wait. The second admitted acute distress only after the patient began to collapse. "A user-side calibration failure," Arden said. "Rare, regrettable, already contained." The patient nearly died. And did not. Cora heard the clipped syllable again in memory. "I want the raw vocal record." Arden turned from her to the room. "This meeting concerns the protection of disciplined clinical procedure. Dr. Wynne has just demonstrated why deviations." "The raw record." A silence passed through the gallery. Arden's voice cooled. There was no medically relevant speech recorded before the collapse. Cora looked at the patient's lumi pattern frozen on the display. The tiny creature had known. The patient had known. Only the station had heard nothing. Tavik accompanied her to the raw signal diagnostic room because the incident review required an observer. He walked half a step behind her, not close enough to touch. The room sat between the translation lattice and the clinical network, a narrow chamber lined with acoustic baffles. Every spoken statement on Vesper Junction passed through it before reaching a medical record. Cora signed into the review console. Most controls were unavailable. Tavik folded his arms. You used a restraint technique. I used your decision. That is not an answer. It is the only one you need. His jaw plates clicked once. Biscari supervisors use physical placement to correct disorder. Then Biscari supervisor should learn to ask whether the disorder is bleeding. He said nothing to that. Cora opened the Enhalu patient's file. The translator offered a polished chronology: mild pressure, increased discomfort, acute respiratory distress. Beneath it sat the physiological record, which showed the lungs beginning to fail before the first statement had been logged. She searched for the raw audio. Access denied. She searched for adjacent sensor channels. Access denied. She requested the Lumi telemetry. That unexpectedly opened. The patient's symbiote had been registered as an ornamental companion, so its light was treated as environmental data rather than protected medical speech. Cora watched the pattern run beside the translator's timeline. The Lumi flashed hard and uneven during the period labeled waiting acceptable. It settled only after the pressure drain. Ornament, she murmured. Tavik leaned nearer to the display. What? That's how the station classifies it. It is an animal. It is a witness. He watched the light pattern repeat. You believe it understood the patient. I believe it responded before our system admitted there was a problem. Cora searched recent cases. The same classification appeared again. Enhalu patient, mild complaint, sudden escalation, corrective intervention after physical collapse. Another. The details differed, the shape did not. One file belonged to a doc medic whose complaint had been translated as confusion after exertion. The physiological trace showed a dangerous reaction to a common stabilizer. The patient had tried to name the compound, but the tone carrying its identity had been stored as background respiration. Another case described an Enhalu surveyor as combative. The raw motion record showed the surveyor pointing repeatedly at an old surgical scar, while the translator reduced the warning to do not touch. Security had restrained the patient. The procedure had continued. Tavik read the enforcement note. His authorization mark sat beneath it. Cora did not look at him. She kept opening files. The pattern widened. Enhalu statements became shorter each time they passed through the lattice. Conditions disappeared. Previous reactions vanished. Consent changed from relational and specific to a simple yes or no. Whenever a patient's body contradicted the simplified answer, the record blamed agitation, cultural resistance, or delayed disclosure. The station had converted missing meaning into patient fault. Why did no physician stop this? Tavik asked. Some tried. Cora opened a cluster of internal warnings. They were told the outcomes were within expected variance. Were they? Only after Enhalu cases were grouped under a separate tolerance model. He frowned, meaning. It means the station changed the definition of acceptable harm until the numbers looked clean. Tavik's arms lowered. How many? He asked. Enough that this stopped being rare. The door opened behind them. Suma K entered without waiting for permission. She wore the pale gray mantle of a Enhalu healer, though the station had replaced her clinical access band with a visitor strip. A Lumi rested at her throat, glowing a quiet amber. The translator spoke for her. Dr. Wynn requested consultation. I am available. Suma continued speaking after the translated sentence ended. Cora heard 3 overlapping breath tones, one rising, one held, one pulsing below them. The station speakers muted the rest. "What did it remove?" Cora asked. The translator answered in Suma's borrowed voice. "Nothing medically relevant." Suma's Lumi flashed red. Cora disabled the room speaker and switched to the raw microphone. Suma spoke again. Without translation, the sound was layered and unfamiliar but not chaotic. One tone repeated the phrase. Another altered its condition. The lowest carried something like a warning. Suma touched the console and typed in trade standard. "I said I was available if the patient consented, unless the pressure drain had already changed the lower sac rhythm. I also said your translator would remove that condition." Tavik stared at the screen. Cora pulled a chair beside the console. "Show me." Suma selected the patient recording, but the station had retained only separated channels. She played them individually. Each contained a clean sound with no obvious meaning. Then she aligned them. The layered cry filled the room. The translator attempted to speak over it, pressure, mild, weighting acceptable. Suma froze the waveforms and highlighted the intervals between the tones. She typed again. "Meaning is carried by relation. One voice locates pain. One identifies what changed. One states consent or refusal. A fourth may carry history if another Nhalu is present. You separate them. Then you keep whichever part fits the form." Cora felt the shape of her own mistake. She had thought finding the raw audio would be enough, but a pile of untouched signals was not understanding. It was merely a less polished form of ignorance. "Can Nhalu healers read all of it?" she asked. "Not alone. Context is shared. A patient may call. Family, healer, or symbiote completes what cannot be carried safely in one breath." Tavik stepped toward the console. "During intake disputes, I have heard this pattern." Suma looked at him. He replayed a file from his own disciplinary archive. A Nhalu worker had refused a treatment cue. The station transcript read, "No, refuse, leave." Suma aligned the suppressed tones. Her typed translation appeared. "I consent to treatment, but not the compound previously used. It stopped my breathing. Please bring the healer who knows the alternative." Tavik went still. "I removed that patient from the ward," he said. Suma's Lumi dimmed. Cora searched the system settings for the separation rule. The interface buried it beneath a harmless label, clarity compression. She opened the deployment history. Approved by Director Jex Arden. Clinical warning attached. Warning dismissed. Cora opened the financial attachment linked to the filter deployment. It was not written as a medical order. It was a staffing forecast. If clarity compression reached its projected performance, the station could remove Nhalu healers from emergency rotations, reduce consultation delays, and transfer interpretation authority to an automated contract provider. The savings had been highlighted. The projected harm had not. Suma read the document over Cora's shoulder. Her throat tones shifted and the translator offered only, "This is disappointing." The Lumi at her throat burned crimson. Cora disabled the translated voice. "Say it in writing." Suma did. "They called our knowledge a delay, then built a machine that could only work after removing it." Tavik looked toward the sealed door, as though he could see Arden through the station walls. "He approved this to remove you. He approved it because our presence proved the system was incomplete." The note attached to the authorization was brief. "Layered species speech reduces throughput, increases uncertainty, and prevents automated resolution. Compression authorized." Tavik read it twice. "This is not a malfunction," Cora said. "No," Suma typed, "it is obedience." The station alert chimed. An inbound medical transport had requested priority docking. Its passenger manifest identified Enhalu respiratory exposure across multiple compartments. The incoming condition was familiar to Suma. A coolant treatment agent used on the transport had bonded with particles in the ventilation system. To most species, it caused temporary irritation. In Enhalu lungs, the effect depended on prior exposure, the age of the respiratory lining, and which stabilizing compounds had been used before. Those differences were carried in the layered histories the station was deleting. One universal treatment would help some patients. It would close the airways of others. Cora sent that warning to emergency intake. The system returned it with a red banner, unverified cultural interpretation. Arden then restricted her clinical privileges. Director Arden's face appeared on the wall display. All clinical personnel report to emergency intake. Enhalu advisory staff will remain outside controlled treatment areas until translation stability is confirmed. Suma's Lumi flashed once, bright and cold. Cora closed the file. He knows exactly what is coming. The emergency intake theater had been designed to make panic look orderly. Treatment cradles unfolded from the walls. Diagnostic arches activated in sequence. Pale guide lights divided incoming patients into neat paths. Above the floor, behind a sealed observation balcony, accreditation witnesses gathered to watch Vesper Junction process a mass casualty event with the speed Arden had promised them. The transport docked. The first Enhalu patients came through bent under their own breathing, Lumi strobing against gray skin. Their voices overlapped at once, pain, warning, memory, consent, and the station stripped the sound into smooth, isolated sentences. Chest discomfort. No known reaction. Treatment accepted. Cora saw 3 patients pushed toward the same medication bank. Their Lumi showed 3 different patterns. Stop those feeds, she ordered. The automated system rejected her command. Arden appeared on the central platform with 2 clinical administrators. Dr. Wynn, you are under review. Step away from intake control. These diagnoses are false. They are standardized. That is the problem. The balcony witnesses shifted behind the glass. Arden lowered his voice. You have already assaulted a station marshal and disrupted a mandatory review. Do not convert your misconduct into a medical theory. Tavik stood at the edge of the platform, rigid in his dark supervisor's uniform. Arden looked at him. Remove her. The nearest patient gasped. The translator reported stable discomfort. The Lumi at the patient's collarbone faded from violet to a weak gray. Tavik looked at the display, then at the living creature losing its light. He moved toward Cora. She braced not for a fight, but for the lost time it would cost. Tavik stopped beyond arm's reach. His hand lifted. For an instant, Cora saw the same hand closing around her wrist. He halted it before contact. What do you need me to open? He asked. The raw ward channels. Arden's voice sharpened. Marshal. Tavik turned to the platform controls. His authority band still carried emergency access. He placed it against the reader and removed the suppression layer. The theater filled with sound. Not noise, not music, voices. Some sharp, some breathless, some braided with the responses of healers still trapped beyond the doors. The translator stuttered as meanings it had been designed to discard poured back into the network. Arden struck the command panel. Reinstate language lock. The sound vanished. Across the ward, several Lumi dimmed together. Manual override, Cora said. Tavik's gaze went to a secured passage beneath the balcony. Processing chamber. Open it. This time he did not hesitate. Suma and the other Enhalu healers were waiting behind the restricted barrier. Tavik released it. They entered the theater in a rush of layered voices. Arden ordered security to block them. No one moved. Cora ran for the processing chamber with Tavik beside her, and Suma closed behind. The chamber vibrated with active cancellation fields. On the wall, a live acoustic map showed the translator separating every incoming statement into clean vertical channels, then erasing the relationships between them. Cora listened. The interference was not uniform. Ceiling speakers near the respiratory cradles canceled lower tones. Bedside emitters flattened conditional responses. The diagnostic arches amplified whichever channel produced the most decisive answer. The system was not merely translating speech. It was manufacturing certainty. "Can you restore the relationships?" Cora asked Suma. Suma studied the map and typed quickly. "Not from here. The voices must answer one another in the ward. We can identify the contexts, but the cancellation points will keep cutting them apart." Cora pulled up the speaker grid. "Then we change the room." She routed each raw microphone to a different emitter instead of sending every voice through the central translator. The system objected, warning that decentralized audio would reduce clarity. "Good," she said. She marked cancellation zones across the theater. Move the respiratory patients away from the ceiling arrays. Turn the diagnostic arches sideways. Place portable emitters at floor level. No one accepts a translated consent statement unless a Nhalu healer confirms the relationship. Tavik relayed the orders. Staff began moving. On the balcony, the accreditation witnesses watched the clean emergency demonstration dissolve into urgent, imperfect work. Arden reached the processing chamber door. "This is an unauthorized reconfiguration of protected medical infrastructure." Cora did not look away from the map. "Your protected infrastructure is killing people." "You cannot prove that." Suma placed her hand on the console and opened the suppressed clinical archive. The room filled with prior warnings. Nhalu healers describing missing conditions. Nurses reporting contradictions between translated consent and physical resistance. Physicians requesting raw review. Arden's replies dismissing each case as inefficiency, noncompliance, or cultural interference. He lunged for the console. Tavik stepped between them. Arden stared up at the marshal. "Your duty is order." Tavik's voice was quiet. "I mistook silence for it." The station lock tried to reassert itself. Cora saw suppression bars rising across the acoustic map. She opened the balcony feed. Every raw warning, every dismissed report, and every authorization signed by Arden passed into the accreditation channel before he could close it. One witness removed the station director's seal from Arden's command profile. Another froze his clinical credentials. His display went dark while he was still reaching for it. The ward alarm changed pitch. A cluster of patients had begun to fail. Cora could stay in the chamber and preserve the evidence stream manually, or return to the theater before the automated treatments completed. She set the archive to transmit on an open loop. Arden understood what she had done. If you leave, you lose control of the record. Cora was already at the door. The record is not the patient. She ran back into the theater. The raw channels had turned the ward into a dense field of breath and response. Staff struggled to separate instructions. Several humans and Biscari covered one ear, overwhelmed. A second patient began convulsing as an automated injector descended. Cora caught the injector housing with both hands before the needle reached the skin. The machine pushed against her, certain because its record was certain. "Which history?" she called. 3 Nhalu answered at once. Cora heard only overlapping tones. Suma struck the rail beside her, drawing attention to the patient's lumi. Its pattern matched one response, not the others. She indicated an older scar along the patient's side, then rejected the descending injector with a sharp motion. Cora killed the feed and selected the alternative stabilizer. The convulsions eased. She had saved the patient, but not by solving the language herself. Suma had connected voice, light, scar, and shared history in a way no isolated sensor could reproduce. That distinction settled into Cora with uncomfortable force. Listening was not the act of collecting everything another being produced. It was allowing that being to remain an authority on what those signs meant. Suma climbed onto the central platform. She called to the first patient. A healer across the room answered. A lumi near the respiratory cradles flashed green, then amber. Suma pointed to one medication bank and rejected another. A nurse changed the feed. The patient's breathing eased. More Nhalu voices joined, not in unison, not as ritual, but in precise exchanges. One carried the location of pain. Another supplied the reaction history. A family member confirmed which treatment had failed before. The lumi marked changes that words alone could not safely carry. Cora listened for the cancellations. Lower the east emitter. Tavik moved it. Rotate the intake arch. A technician obeyed. Open the wall pickup near the second row. The missing bass tones surged through. The translator tried to flatten them. Cora cut its authority over the medical record and left it active only as an advisory layer. A patient's display changed from treatment accepted to consent uncertain, context incomplete. For the first time, the station admitted what it did not know. Arden's voice came from behind them. You are replacing a universal standard with confusion. Cora watched the lumi brighten. Beside a patient the standard had nearly killed. When every voice is forced into the same shape, the system stops translating and starts erasing, Tavik said. The nearest accreditation witness heard him through the open feed. So did the entire ward. The final suppression field failed. Every layered statement reached the healers intact. The theater did not become quieter, it became comprehensible. Treatment teams separated patients by actual reaction history instead of simplified complaint. A sedative order was canceled. A respiratory compound was replaced. A pressure procedure began only after the patient's consent pattern was completed by a healer and confirmed by the lumi. Cora moved from cradle to cradle, checking bodies against words, words against context, context against the people who owned it. At the far end of the ward, the opening patient had been brought from recovery to help interpret a relative's history. Their lumi glowed steady violet. Cora understood then that Vesper Junction had never lacked information. It had lacked permission for information to remain difficult. The emergency lasted through orbital night. No announcement declared victory. The ward simply stopped losing patients to answers they had never given. Director Arden remained on the station because the medical quarantine had sealed every departure route. By the time the seals lifted, the accreditation board had revoked his authority, suspended his credentials, and assigned independent control of the clinical network. He was escorted from the platform office to an unused consultation room where no staff member requested his guidance. He could see the recovery ward through the partition. He could also hear it. The raw context channels remained open. Cora found Tavik near the first patient's bed. His uniform no longer carried the marshal's command light. He had surrendered it pending review. The patient spoke softly. The translator displayed. Breathing improved. Previous treatment warning retained. Consent to examination confirmed with healer context. Suma read the output, then nodded. The patient's lumi warmed from amber to gold. Tavik kept his hands behind his back. The board asked why I opened the restricted channels. What did you tell them? That the displays were wrong. They were wrong before. I did not look before. Cora glanced at him. He continued, each word deliberate. I believed equal procedure meant identical procedure. I enforced what the system could measure. I removed people when their meaning took too long. Suma stood beside the bed. Her Lumi remained quiet. Tavik faced her. I removed a patient who was warning us that treatment had stopped their breathing. Yes, the translator said. Suma continued speaking. The system did not cut her off. The full translation appeared. Yes, you cannot undo that removal. You can refuse to repeat it. Tavik lowered his head. I will. He did not ask forgiveness. That mattered to Cora more than an apology shaped to obtain comfort. When he turned to her, he kept the same careful distance. And I seized you. You did. I will accept the finding. Good. His jaw plates shifted, almost expecting more. Cora gave him none. Respect would be measured in what he did after the room stopped watching. Suma joined Cora at the revised translation console. The station engineers had restored the ordinary universal translator for routine exchanges, but the medical network now preserved raw layers beside every interpretation. No automated statement could be marked complete, while a recognized contextual channel remained unresolved. It was better. It was not enough. Cora opened the first patient's original file. I thought that if I reached the raw signal, the truth would be sitting there intact. Suma typed while speaking, letting the new system learn without pretending it already understood. Raw sound can still be lonely. You heard the missing part. You did not yet know who was needed to complete it. I nearly turned you into another diagnostic tool. You stopped. Late. Suma's Lumi pulsed once. The emergency was already there. Cora looked toward Tavik. He had heard it. This time he did not defend the schedule. Across the ward, staff practiced the new intake protocol. A human nurse asked a Nhalu patient to repeat a statement. A Nhalu healer supplied the condition attached to it. The translator marked the result as provisional until the patient's Lumi settled and the physical examination agreed. No one called the delay inefficiency. The opening patient lifted a hand toward Cora. When she approached, they touched 2 fingers lightly to her sleeve, the same place they had gripped during the first collapse. The patient spoke. The old system would have produced a polished sentence. The new one displayed. Meaning incomplete. Patient indicates gratitude, continuing discomfort and uncertainty about recovery. Healer confirmation requested. Suma listened. She answered. The patient's Lumi softened. The final translation appeared. I am grateful you heard me. I am still afraid. Stay until the next breath changes. Cora pulled a chair beside the bed. Outside the station, Vesper's star rose over the orbital rim. Sunrise crossed the recovery ward. Along every bed, the Lumi brightened in different rhythms while Vesper Junction finally allowed the voices to remain different.